The rain hammered against the corrugated metal roof of Martinez Auto Repair like bullets from heaven. Each drop a reminder that even the sky seemed intent on washing away everything Miguel had built. He wiped his grease-stained hands on a rag that had seen better decades, squinting through the grimy windows of his shop at the storm that had been raging for 3 days straight. The leak in the northeast corner had grown worse, sending a steady drip into the rusty coffee can he'd positioned beneath it. The sound, plink, 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 had become the metronome of his mounting desperation. Miguel Santos had inherited this slice of automotive purgatory from his father, along with a mountain of debt that seemed to grow larger each month like some malevolent organism feeding on his dreams. The small shop reflected his circumstances, wedged between struggle and hope. At 34, Miguel's hands told the story of every car he'd ever touched: scarred knuckles, permanently blackened fingernails, and calluses that had calluses of their own. His father, God rest his soul, had always said that a man's hands were his legacy. Miguel wondered what legacy he was building, with hands that could rebuild an engine from memory, but couldn't seem to rebuild his life from the wreckage it had become. The bell above the door chimed, a sound that usually brought hope, but today brought only the scent of expensive perfume and the click of heels that had never walked through puddles out of necessity. If you're enjoying Miguel's journey from struggle to hope, please like this video and subscribe for more inspiring stories that show how one moment can change everything. It only takes a second, but means the world to us. Miguel looked up from the ancient Chevy he'd been wrestling with to see a woman unlike any who had ever graced his humble establishment. She stood in the doorway like a vision conjured from another world, her silver hair swept back in a style that whispered of boardrooms and power lunches, her navy suit tailored with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Everything about her spoke of money, not the nouveau Ricci showiness of gold chains and diamond-encrusted watches, but the quiet, confident wealth of someone who'd never had to check her bank balance before making a purchase. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being heard the first time. "I'm looking for someone who can help me with my car. I've broken down just outside, and I'm afraid I'm not very mechanical." Miguel straightened, suddenly aware of how he must look. Coverall stained with the honest grime of hard work, hair disheveled from crawling under cars, the permanent eau de motor oil that no amount of scrubbing seemed to eliminate. He nodded toward the door, grabbing his toolbox with hands that suddenly felt clumsy. "Of course, ma'am. Let's take a look." Outside, parked at an angle that suggested panic rather than precision, sat the most beautiful car Miguel had ever seen in person. The Mercedes-Benz S-Class gleamed despite the storm, its paint job reflecting the storm clouds like a mirror made of liquid silver. Even wounded, it radiated an elegance that made Miguel's chest tight with longing. This wasn't just transportation, it was automotive poetry, every line and curve crafted by artists who understood that a car could be more than metal and machinery. "She just died on me," the woman explained, hovering under an umbrella that probably cost more than Miguel made in a week. One moment she was purring like a contented cat, the next moment nothing. The dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree. Miguel popped the hood, and even in the gray light of the storm, the engine bay was immaculate. Chrome gleamed, hoses ran in perfect lines, and everything spoke of meticulous maintenance and unlimited budgets. But cars, regardless of their pedigree, were still just machines, and machines broke down with democratic equality. The wealthy might drive prettier cars, but physics didn't care about the size of your bank account. "Looks like your alternator," Miguel said, his trained eyes spotting the problem immediately. "See how this belt slipped? And these connections here are corroded despite the car being so well maintained. Sometimes the expensive parts fail just like the cheap ones." The woman stepped closer, close enough that Miguel caught a whiff of her perfume, something French and complicated that probably cost more than he spent on groceries in a month. "Can you fix it? I have a very important meeting in 2 hours." Miguel glanced at the Mercedes, then back at his shop,
then at the woman whose day he held in his grease-stained hands. Most shops would quote her a premium price, knowing she could afford it, knowing she had no choice. But Miguel's father had taught him that integrity wasn't negotiable, that a man's word was worth more than gold, even when gold was exactly what that man needed most. "I can fix it, but I'll need about 90 minutes and I'll have to pull parts for my shop. The alternator I've got won't be original equipment, but it'll get you running reliably. Won't cost you more than what it would at any other shop." Something shifted in the woman's expression, surprise, perhaps, or curiosity. "You're not going to charge me extra because I'm obviously desperate and can clearly afford it?" "A fair price is a fair price, ma'am. Your money is the same as everyone else's." As he worked, Miguel felt the familiar peace that came with losing himself in the mechanical meditation of repair. His hands moved with the confidence of decades, replacing the alternator with the methodical precision of a surgeon performing life-saving surgery. The rain continued its assault on the roof, but inside the shop, surrounded by the familiar smells of metal and motor oil, Miguel felt at home in a way that nowhere else provided. The woman, she'd introduced herself as Catherine, though she carried herself like someone whose last name commanded respect, watched him work with an intensity that made Miguel self-conscious. She asked questions, real questions, about what he was doing and why, and her eyes followed his hands with the attention of someone genuinely interested in understanding rather than simply passing time. "You enjoy this?" she observed, not really a question. Miguel glanced up from the engine compartment, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his wrist. "I do. There's something honest about mechanical problems. They don't lie or make excuses or pretend to be something they're not. You diagnose the issue, you fix it, and either it works or it doesn't. Simple." "Unlike people," Catherine said with a smile that carried stories. "Unlike people," Miguel agreed. As he reconnected the final wire, Miguel found himself talking in a way he rarely did with customers, sharing the dreams he usually kept locked away like precious secrets. He told Catherine about his vision for Santos Custom Restoration, about the classic cars that deserved better than the scrapyard, about the artistry involved in bringing automotive history back to life. His words came out in a rush, as if they'd been dammed up for too long and finally found a crack in the wall of his usual reserve. Catherine listened with the kind of attention that made Miguel feel heard, really heard, perhaps for the first time in years. She asked about his background, about his training, about the business plan that sat collecting dust in his desk drawer. And when Miguel mentioned his father, the way his voice softened with love and loss, Catherine's expression grew thoughtful, in a way that suggested she understood the weight of legacy and the burden of carrying forward someone else's dreams along with your own.
"There," Miguel said, finally, closing the hood with satisfaction. "She should run like new. The alternator I installed is actually more reliable than the original. Sometimes the aftermarket parts are built better than what comes from the factory." Catherine slid behind the wheel, and the Mercedes came to life with the smooth purr of German engineering at its finest. The dashboard remained dark, no warning lights, no signs of distress. Miguel had performed his small miracle, bringing order back to chaos, function back to failure. "How much do I owe you?" Catherine asked, reaching for a purse that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Miguel calculated parts and labor, adding his standard markup, but nothing more despite the obvious wealth of his customer. $240, he said. Catherine handed him $300 bills without hesitation. "Keep the change, and thank you. Not just for the repair, but for the conversation. It's rare to meet someone who talks about their work with such passion." As she prepared to leave, Catherine paused, her hand on the door handle. "Miguel, this business plan of yours, this Santos Custom Restoration, do you have it written down? Don't forget to hit that like button if you're rooting for Miguel's dreams to come true. Share this story with someone who needs inspiration and subscribe so you never miss these incredible real-life transformations." Miguel nodded, wondering where this was leading. Every detail,
Market analysis, financial projections, equipment needs, target customer base. I've been working on it for 3 years. And you need funding to make it happen? 50,000 would cover everything. Equipment, initial inventory, shop improvements, operating capital for the first 6 months. The words tumbled out before Miguel could stop them, and he immediately felt foolish. Why was he telling a stranger his financial needs? Catherine smiled, an expression that seemed to hold secrets and possibilities. Well, Miguel Santos, I have a feeling we might be speaking again very soon. Thank you for restoring my faith in honest mechanics and in the American dream. She drove away into the storm, the Mercedes disappearing into the gray afternoon like a silver ghost, leaving Miguel standing in the doorway of his humble shop with $300 in his hand and a strange sense that something significant had just occurred. He didn't know it yet, but the woman who'd walked into his life seeking automotive help was Catherine Pinnacle, president and CEO of Pinnacle National Bank, the same bank where his loan application waited like a sleeping dragon that could either grant his wishes or incinerate his dreams. The rain continued to fall, but for the first time in weeks, Miguel Santos allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the storm was finally beginning to pass. The $300 helped with immediate bills, but Miguel was soon back to his familiar financial struggles. Sophia's homework lay scattered across the kitchen table of their small apartment above the shop, math problems that seemed to mock him with their clean certainty, numbers that added up perfectly, unlike the chaotic arithmetic of his life, where expenses always exceeded income, where dreams cost more than reality could afford. His 12-year-old daughter worked with the focused intensity she'd inherited from him, her dark hair falling across her face as she bent over equations that had clear solutions, unlike the problems that kept her father awake at night. "Papa, can you help me with this one?" Sophia asked, pointing to a word problem about compound interest that made Miguel's chest tighten. The irony wasn't lost on him, his daughter learning about how money could grow while he struggled to keep any money from disappearing entirely. Miguel slid into the chair beside her, inhaling the scent of her strawberry shampoo, a small luxury he refused to sacrifice even when the bills mounted higher than his hope. "Let's see. If someone invests $500 at 6% interest compounded annually," he worked through the problem with her, showing her how money could multiply over time, how patience and consistency could build wealth from modest beginnings. The lesson felt like swallowing glass. After Sophia went to bed, Miguel sat alone at the kitchen table, surrounded by the familiar constellation of unpaid bills and rejection letters from various lenders. Each, "we regret to inform you," felt like a small death, another dream deferred until it withered from neglect. The folder containing his business plan sat before him like an accusation, 3 years of research and hope reduced to paper that might as well have been tissue for all the good it had done him. He opened the folder anyway, running his fingers over the pages he'd memorized by heart. The market analysis showed a growing demand for classic car restoration among affluent collectors. The financial projections were conservative but promising, based on research into similar businesses across the country. He'd identified his target market, calculated his overhead, projected his growth trajectory. Everything was there except the one thing that mattered most: $50,000 to make it real. Miguel's phone buzzed with a text from his sister Maria. "How's the loan application going? Any word from the bank?" He typed back, "Still waiting to hear. These things take time." The lie came easily, but it sat heavy in his stomach alongside the instant ramen that had become his dinner more nights than he cared to admit. The next morning brought Mrs. Chen, whose ancient Buick needed more work than it was worth, and Tommy Rodriguez, whose pickup truck required creative parts sourcing since the original manufacturer had gone out of business during the Clinton administration. Miguel worked with the methodical patience his father had taught him, taking pride in solving problems that other shops would have declared hopeless. But pride didn't pay the rent, and satisfaction didn't fill empty stomachs. During his lunch break, a bologna sandwich and coffee that could have been used to degrease engines, Miguel walked to the library and used their computer to research Pinnacle National Bank. Catherine's face smiled at him from the website's leadership page, and he nearly choked on his sandwich. Catherine Pinnacle, President and CEO, Harvard MBA, 30 years in banking, known for her innovative approaches to small business lending. The woman whose Mercedes he'd repaired, whose conversation had made him feel heard and valued, was the same person who would ultimately decide the fate of his loan application. The realization hit him like a wrench to the gut. Had she been testing him somehow? Was their conversation some kind of character evaluation disguised as small talk? Miguel replayed every word, every gesture, searching for signs that he'd been under scrutiny without knowing it. The honest pricing, the passionate description of his dreams, the admission of his struggles, had all of it been some kind of inadvertent job interview? Back at the shop, Miguel found himself distracted, dropping tools and fumbling with repairs that should have been routine. His hands, usually so steady and sure, trembled with the weight of possibility and fear. What if Catherine remembered him? What if she didn't? What if his honesty had impressed her? Or what if it had revealed him as just another dreamer without the capital to back up his ambitions? The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor, James Mitchell, who owned the high-end collision repair shop across town. James drove luxury cars and wore clothes that never seemed to accumulate stains, the kind of successful businessman Miguel aspired to become. They'd gone to high school together, back when the future seemed equally uncertain for both of them. James said, "My friend, I heard through the grapevine that you've been thinking about expanding operations." Miguel wiped his hands on his coveralls, trying to read the expression on James's face. "Something like that. Still in the planning stages." "Well, I have a proposition for you. I'm looking to expand into restoration work, and I need someone with your skills and reputation. I could offer you a position as shop foreman, good salary, benefits, steady work. You'd be working on the kind of cars you've always dreamed about." The offer hung in the air between them like incense, sweet and tempting. A steady paycheck, health insurance for Sophia, the security that had been eluding him for years. But it would also mean abandoning his dream of Santos Custom Restoration, of building something that carried his father's name and his own vision into the future.
That's a generous offer, James. Can I think about it? Of course, but don't think too long. Opportunities like this don't wait around forever, and I know you've got responsibilities. James's eyes flickered toward the ceiling, where Sophia's footsteps could be heard moving around the apartment. The implication was clear. A father's first duty was to provide stability for his child, not to chase dreams that might never materialize. After James left, Miguel sat in his office, staring at the loan application that had been gathering dust for 2 weeks. The bank's deadline was Friday, 3 days away. He could submit it and risk another rejection, or he could accept James's offer and trade his dreams for security. The choice felt like choosing between his father's legacy and his daughter's future, between the man he'd always wanted to become and the man circumstances seemed determined to make him.
That evening, Sophia found him sitting on the fire escape outside their apartment, staring at the city lights that stretched toward horizons he'd never explored. The summer air carried the sense of cooking from neighboring apartments, spices and hope, and the simple comfort of families sharing meals together. "You look sad, Papa," Sophia said, settling beside him on the metal grating that served as their backyard. Miguel wrapped his arm around his daughter, pulling her close. "Just thinking about the future, mija. About the choices we have to make. Like whether to follow your dreams or be practical?" Sophia asked, with the casual wisdom of children who listen more carefully than adults realize. Miguel looked at her with surprise. "How do you know about that?" "I hear you talking to yourself sometimes when you think I'm asleep. You talk about the restoration shop, about Grandpa's legacy, about making sure I have everything I need." Sophia leaned against his shoulder, warm and solid and real. "Mama always said you were too good for this world, that you cared more about doing right than doing well." Miguel's throat tightened at the mention of Elena, Sophia's mother, who died in a car accident when Sophia was 7. Elena had believed in his dreams even when they seemed impossible, had encouraged him to think beyond the small world of their neighborhood and reach for something larger. "What do you think I should do?" Miguel asked, genuinely curious about his daughter's perspective. Sophia was quiet for a long moment, watching a plane blink its way across the star-scattered sky. "I think Grandpa would want you to try. I think Mama would too. And I think I'd rather have a papa who tried and failed than one who never tried at all." Her words hit him like revelation, simple and profound in the way that truth often is. Miguel realized that he'd been so focused on providing security that he'd forgotten to provide inspiration, so concerned with protecting Sophia from disappointment that he'd risked teaching her to settle for less than her dreams demanded. The next morning, Miguel made 2 phone calls. The first was to James Mitchell, politely declining his offer with gratitude and regret. The second was to Pinnacle National Bank, requesting a meeting to discuss his loan application in person. The receptionist informed him that Mrs. Pinnacle could see him Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock, the same day his application deadline expired. Miguel spent the next 2 days preparing like a defendant getting ready for trial. He reviewed every aspect of his business plan, researched market trends, prepared for every question Catherine might ask. He practiced his presentation in the mirror, trying to project confidence while battling the butterflies that seemed to have taken up permanent residence in his stomach. Thursday night, he lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of the city settling into sleep around him. Sirens in the distance, the rumble of late-night traffic, the whisper of wind through the fire escape. These were the sounds of his world, the soundtrack of his struggles and small victories. Tomorrow, he would sit across from Catherine Pinnacle and ask her to bet $50,000 on a poor mechanic's dreams. The thought terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. But as Miguel finally drifted off to sleep, he carried with him the memory of Sophia's words and the weight of his father's legacy. Some risks are worth taking, some dreams worth fighting for, regardless of the odds against success. Tomorrow, he would find out if Catherine Pinnacle agreed.
Friday morning arrived like a sentencing hearing, gray clouds pressing down on the city with the weight of unspoken verdicts. Miguel stood before his bathroom mirror, adjusting the tie he'd borrowed from his neighbor, the only man on the block who owned such luxuries, and trying to transform himself from a mechanic into a businessman through sheer force of will. The reflection staring back at him showed a man caught between worlds, hands scrubbed clean but permanently stained, hair slicked back but naturally rebellious, eyes filled with hope wrestling against the gravity of experience. The suit had belonged to his father, kept preserved in plastic like a museum artifact of better days that had never quite arrived.
It hung loose in places where Miguel's frame hadn't filled out his father's broader shoulders, tight in others where years of physical labor had built muscle his father had never possessed. But it was clean and pressed, and carried the faint scent of the cologne his father had worn to church every Sunday, Old Spice and Aspirations. Sophia appeared in the doorway, her school backpack slung over one shoulder, taking in the sight of her father transformed. "You look nervous, Papa." "Terrified," Miguel admitted, seeing no point in pretending otherwise. "What if I'm not good enough? What if my dreams are bigger than my abilities?" Sophia stepped forward and straightened his tie with the serious concentration of a child playing adult. "Remember what you always tell me when I'm scared about a test? That fear just means something matters to you. And this matters, doesn't it?" Miguel nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "More than I can explain." "Then you're already successful, Papa, because caring about something that much is success all by itself." The wisdom of children, Miguel thought, often arrived disguised as innocence but carried the weight of absolute truth. He kissed the top of Sophia's head, inhaling the strawberry scent of her shampoo one more time before stepping into whatever future awaited him at Pinnacle National Bank. The bus ride downtown felt like traveling to another planet, each stop carrying him further from the familiar comfort of his neighborhood into the gleaming canyons of commerce where money moved in amounts he could barely comprehend. Miguel clutched his worn briefcase, another hand-me-down from his father, and watched through the window as the city transformed around him. Chain-link fences gave way to manicured landscaping, graffitied walls became glass towers, and dreams became increasingly expensive with each mile traveled. Pinnacle National Bank rose 37 floors into the Seattle sky. Its facade of steel and glass reflected clouds that seemed close enough to touch. The lobby stretched upward like a cathedral dedicated to capitalism, all marble and mahogany and the hushed reverence that only serious money could inspire. Miguel felt like a trespasser in a museum, every footstep echoing his inadequacy across polished floors that probably cost more per square foot than his entire shop.
When Catherine finally arrived, Miguel's breath caught in his throat. Gone was the rain-soaked vulnerability of their first meeting, replaced by the polished authority of a woman who commanded respect through presence alone. Her silver hair was swept back in a style that spoke of morning meetings with mayors and afternoon calls with congressmen. Her navy suit was tailored with surgical precision, and her smile carried the calculated warmth of someone who'd learned to weaponize charm in the service of business. "Miguel Santos," she said, extending a hand that felt surprisingly warm despite the fortress of formality surrounding them. "I was hoping we'd have a chance to talk again." Miguel rose from his chair, acutely aware of how his borrowed suit probably looked as someone accustomed to Italian tailoring and Swiss precision. "Mrs. Pinnacle, thank you for seeing me. I have to admit I was a bit surprised to discover who you were." Catherine's smile carried a hint of mischief. "I imagine you were. I don't usually introduce myself with my full title when I'm stranded in the rain. Please, sit. Can I offer you something to drink? Coffee? Water?" "Coffee would be great," Miguel said, grateful for anything that might steady his hands and calm his nerves. As Catherine's secretary brought in coffee in cups that probably cost more than most people spent on dinner, Miguel found himself studying the woman across from him with new eyes. This was the person who held the power to transform his life or crush his dreams with equal ease. Every word he spoke, every gesture he made would be weighed against criteria he could only guess at. "So," Catherine said,
settling back in her chair with the relaxed confidence of someone completely comfortable in their environment. "Tell me about Santos Custom Restoration." Miguel opened his briefcase and withdrew the folder that contained 3 years of his life, 3 years of research and planning and hope distilled into charts and projections and carefully worded descriptions of a future he could see as clearly as his own reflection. But as he began to speak, something unexpected happened. Instead of delivering the polished presentation he'd rehearsed, Miguel found himself telling the story behind the numbers. He talked about his father, Carlos Santos, who'd come to America with nothing but determination and a gift for understanding machines. How Carlos had built Martinez Auto Repair from a single bay in a converted garage into a neighborhood institution where honesty mattered more than profit margins. He used to say that every old car has a story to tell, Miguel said, his voice growing stronger as he lost himself in the memory. A 1967 Mustang remembers its first teenage owner, the dates and dreams and disappointments it carried. A Corvette from the 70s knows the feel of open highways and the weight of midlife crises. These cars aren't just transportation, they're time machines, carrying pieces of America's automotive soul. Catherine listened with an intensity that reminded Miguel of their first conversation, when she'd watched him work with genuine curiosity rather than the polite attention of social obligation. She asked questions that revealed a deeper understanding of business than Miguel had expected, inquiries about market positioning, competitive advantages, scalability, and risk management. "The restoration market is growing," Miguel explained, spreading out his research across the conference table like a general planning a campaign. "Baby boomers are entering their peak earning years and want to reconnect with the cars of their youth. Classic car values are appreciating faster than many traditional investments, and there's a growing appreciation for craftsmanship in a world that's becoming increasingly digital." "What makes you different from the dozens of restoration shops already operating in the Pacific Northwest?" Catherine asked, and Miguel could hear the banker beneath the conversational tone. Miguel leaned forward, his nervousness evaporating as he entered territory where passion trumped protocol. Quality, attention to detail, the willingness to do things right rather than fast. Most restoration shops are focused on volume, on getting cars in and out as quickly as possible. I want to create something different, a place where every restoration is treated like a work of art, where the goal isn't just to make old cars run, but to make them sing.
He showed her examples of his work, photographs of cars he'd restored as side projects over the years. A 1969 Camaro that had been rusty and regretted when its owner brought it to him, transformed into gleaming muscle that looked better than the day it rolled off the assembly line. A 1955 Thunderbird that had been sitting in a barn for 30 years, now purring with the satisfaction of resurrection. Each photo told a story of transformation, of machines given new life through patience and skill and an almost religious devotion to craft. "These are impressive," Catherine said, studying the photographs with the careful attention of someone who understood value. "But restoration is labor-intensive work. How do you scale craftsmanship without compromising quality?" It was the question Miguel had been wrestling with for 3 years, the central challenge of turning artistic passion into sustainable business. You don't scale the craftsmanship, you scale the appreciation for it. Start with a small number of high-end restorations, build a reputation for excellence, let satisfied customers become your marketing department. Word of mouth in the classic car community travels fast, and collectors are willing to pay premium prices for work they trust. Catherine nodded, making notes in a leather portfolio that probably cost more than Miguel's monthly rent. "And your financial projections?
How confident are you in these numbers? Miguel had spent countless hours researching comparable businesses, analyzing market rates, calculating costs down to the penny. His projections were conservative, based on worst-case scenarios and unexpected expenses. But sitting in this conference room, surrounded by the trappings of serious wealth, his careful calculations felt naive and optimistic. "The numbers are solid," he said, trying to project confidence he didn't entirely feel. "I've researched every aspect of the business, from equipment costs to insurance requirements to marketing budgets. The $50,000 would cover startup costs, initial inventory, shop improvements, and 6 months of operating expenses." "And if the business fails?" Catherine asked, her voice carrying no judgment, just the practical concern of someone who'd seen dreams crumble under the weight of reality. Miguel felt the question like a physical blow. It was the fear that kept him awake at night, the possibility that haunted every optimistic projection. "Then I'll have failed trying rather than succeeded at settling," he said finally. "My daughter will know that her father believed in something strongly enough to risk everything for it, and I'll know that I honored my father's memory by reaching for the dreams he never had the chance to pursue." Catherine was quiet for a long moment, her fingers steepled as she considered his words. Outside the conference room windows, the city continued its relentless pursuit of progress, unaware that one man's future hung in the balance 35 floors above the streets where dreams were made and broken with equal indifference. "Miguel, I have to be honest with you," Catherine said, her voice carrying a weight that made his stomach clench. This was it, the rejection he'd been expecting, delivered with professional courtesy but devastating finality. "Your credit history shows some late payments," Catherine continued, consulting a file that seemed to contain every financial mistake he'd ever made. "Your collateral is limited. Your business experience is primarily as an employee rather than an owner. From a pure risk assessment standpoint, this loan represents a significant exposure for the bank." Miguel nodded, trying to maintain dignity even as his dreams dissolved around him. "I understand," he said. "I appreciate you taking the time to meet me personally." "But," Catherine said, and that single word carried the weight of possibility, "there are other factors to consider beyond traditional metrics." Miguel looked up, afraid to hope, but unable to stop himself.
2 weeks ago, a woman broke down in the rain and found herself at the mercy of a stranger's integrity, Catherine said, her voice softening slightly. That stranger could have charged her double his normal rate, knowing she was desperate and had no alternatives. Instead, he charged a fair price and treated her with the same honesty he would show any customer. That tells me something about character that doesn't show up in credit reports. Miguel's throat was so tight he could barely speak. "Mrs. Pinnacle, Catherine, please, and let me finish." She leaned forward, her executive composure giving way to something more personal. "I've been in banking for 30 years, Miguel. I've seen hundreds of business plans, approved thousands of loans, watched countless entrepreneurs succeed and fail. The successful ones all had one thing in common. They understood that business is ultimately about people, about trust, about doing what you say you're going to do even when no one is watching." Miguel's throat was so tight he could barely speak. "Mrs. Pinnacle, Catherine, please, and let me finish."
She leaned forward, her executive composure giving way to something more personal. "I've been in banking for 30 years, Miguel. I've seen hundreds of business plans, approved thousands of loans, watched countless entrepreneurs succeed and fail. The successful ones all had one thing in common. They understood that business is ultimately about people, about trust, about doing what you say you're going to do, even when no one is watching." Miguel felt tears threatening and fought them back, unwilling to show weakness at such a crucial moment. "Your financial projections are conservative and well-researched. Your market analysis shows genuine understanding of your industry. Your passion for the work is evident in every photograph, every word you've spoken today. But most importantly, you've demonstrated the kind of character that makes me believe you'll honor your commitments, both to your customers and to this bank." The silence stretched between them like a tightrope. Miguel afraid to breathe, lest he disturb whatever delicate balance would determine his fate. "However," Catherine said, and Miguel's heart stopped, "I can't approve this loan alone. Bank policy requires committee approval for any loan over $25,000, and frankly, some of my colleagues are going to see the same risk factors I mentioned earlier. They're going to want guarantees I'm not sure you can provide." Miguel felt hope and despair warring in his chest. "What kind of guarantees?" "Traditional collateral, co-signers with established credit, business partners with proven track records, the kinds of financial safety nets that make bankers sleep better at night." Catherine's expression was sympathetic but realistic. "I know you don't have those resources, or you wouldn't need the loan in the first place." Miguel stared at his hands, those skilled, scarred instruments that could rebuild any engine, but couldn't seem to rebuild his life from the wreckage of circumstance. "So, what happens now?" "Now, you go home and give me some time to work. I'm going to present your case to the loan committee next Wednesday. I'm going to argue that character matters as much as collateral, that integrity is worth more than income statements. I can't promise they'll agree, but I can promise you they'll hear your story." Miguel stood as well, extending his hand toward the woman who held his future in her perfectly manicured fingers. "Mrs. Pinnacle, Catherine, I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you're restoring your first classic car in your own shop." As Miguel rode the elevator down from the 35th floor, he felt suspended between hope and despair, like a man falling upward. Catherine Pinnacle was willing to fight for him, to stake her professional reputation on his dreams. But she'd also made it clear that the battle was far from over, that forces beyond her control would ultimately determine his fate. The bus ride home felt different from the morning journey, not the travel between worlds, but the return to a world that might soon be left behind. Miguel watched the city transform back into his neighborhood, glass towers giving way to corner stores, manicured lawns replaced by chain link and hope. But now he carried with him the possibility of transformation, the chance that Monday morning might arrive carrying news that would change everything. Sophia was waiting for him at the kitchen table, her homework spread around her like an offering to the gods of education. She looked up as he entered, searching his face for signs of victory or defeat. "How did it go, Papa?"
Miguel hung his father's suit jacket on the back of a chair and loosened the borrowed tie, considering how to explain what had happened without raising hopes that might be crushed by committee vote. "She's going to try to help us, mija, but it's not decided yet.
We have to wait a little longer." Sophia nodded with the wisdom of a child who'd learned that life rarely offered simple answers. "Did she remember you? From when you fixed her car?" "She did. She said something about character mattering as much as money, about doing what's right, even when no one is watching." "Like you do," Sophia said simply. "Like I try to do." Miguel kissed the top of her head, breathing in her strawberry-scented optimism. "Like your grandfather taught me to do." That night, Miguel lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of his meeting with Catherine Pinnacle. He thought about the photographs of his restoration work spread across that expensive conference table, about the way Catherine had listened to his dreams as if they mattered, about the possibility that integrity might actually be worth something in a world that seemed to value only profit margins and bottom lines. Somewhere in the city, in a tower that scraped the sky, Catherine Pinnacle was probably working late into the night, preparing arguments that either launch his dreams or bury them forever. The thought filled him with gratitude and terror in equal measure. Wednesday was 6 days away. 6 days to hope, 6 days to fear, 6 days to believe that sometimes, just sometimes, the universe conspired to help those who dared to dream beyond their circumstances. Miguel closed his eyes and tried to imagine Sophia's face when he told her that her papa's dreams were finally going to become reality. But first, he had to survive the wait. The days between Friday and Wednesday crawled by with the relentless pace of geological time, each hour stretching like molten glass being pulled into impossible shapes. Miguel found himself jumping at every phone ring, heart hammering against his ribs like a caged bird desperate for flight. He tried to lose himself in the familiar rhythms of work, oil changes and brake repairs, and the honest problems of machines that broke down according to the predictable laws of physics, rather than the mysterious algorithms of human ambition. But even work couldn't quiet the storm in his mind. Tuesday brought Mrs. Patterson's ancient Honda, a car so thoroughly worn that it seemed held together by prayer and automotive stubbornness. As Miguel worked beneath its rusted chassis, he found himself talking to his father's ghost, seeking wisdom from a man who'd understood the weight of dreams deferred. "What would you do, Papa?" whispered he to the shadows and grease stains that populated his world. "Would you take this risk? Would you bet everything on hope?" The silence that answered carried its own kind of comfort. Carlos Santos had been a practical man, but he'd also been a dreamer. He'd come to America with nothing but determination and had built something from that nothing, creating a life and a legacy through the simple act of never giving up. Maybe that was answer enough. Wednesday morning arrived like Judgment Day, gray and unforgiving, with clouds that seemed to press down on the city like the weight of accumulated disappointment. Miguel had barely slept, his mind cycling through every possible outcome of the loan committee meeting that would begin at 10 o'clock. By 8:30, he'd reorganized his tools 3 times, cleaned equipment that was already spotless, and consumed enough coffee to power a small generator. Sophia noticed his restlessness at breakfast, watching him push scrambled eggs around his plate like pieces in a game he didn't understand. "Papa, you're making me nervous just watching you." "Sorry, mija. Just thinking about today." "Whatever happens, we'll be okay," she said with the casual certainty of youth. "We always figure things out."
Miguel marveled at his daughter's resilience, her ability to find stability in a world that seemed determined to teach her that security was an illusion. At 12, she'd already learned to adapt to uncertainty with grace that shamed most adults. If the loan was denied, she would adjust. If it was approved, she would celebrate. Either way, she would endure, because that's what Santos women did. They survived whatever life threw at them and found ways to thrive. The morning passed with agonizing slowness. Miguel repaired a transmission that should have been declared dead years ago, replaced brake pads on a car whose owner couldn't afford new tires, and helped an elderly customer whose battery had died at the worst possible moment. Each task provided temporary distraction, but his mind kept drifting 35 floors up to a conference room where his fate was being decided by people who knew him only as numbers on spreadsheets. At 11:15, his phone rang. Miguel's hands were elbow-deep in engine grease when the sound cut through the morning air like a fire alarm. He stared at the device for 3 rings, afraid to answer, afraid not to answer, afraid that whatever news awaited him would change everything in ways he couldn't predict or control. Miguel Santos? Miguel? It's Catherine Pinnacle. Do you have a few minutes to talk? Her voice carried a tone he couldn't interpret, professional but warm, serious but not grave. Miguel's heart hammered against his ribs as he tried to read meaning into inflection, searching for clues about his future in the cadence of her words. Of course. How did the meeting go? That's what I'd like to discuss with you in person. Are you available this afternoon? Say 2 o'clock? Miguel glanced at his appointment book, though he would have canceled surgery to make this meeting. I can be there. Actually, I was hoping you might be available to meet somewhere else, somewhere more appropriate to our business relationship moving forward. The words hung in the air like smoke signals whose meaning remained tantalizingly unclear. Moving forward, business relationship. Miguel tried to parse the implications while his mind raced through possibilities that ranged from devastating rejection to impossible approval. Where would you like to meet? There's a property I'd like you to see, an industrial space that came available recently. I'll text you the address. Miguel stared at his phone long after Catherine had hung up, trying to understand why a bank president would want to show him real estate. Property viewings suggested approval, didn't they? Or maybe this was her way of letting him down easy, showing him what he couldn't have, helping him understand the gap between dreams and reality. The address Catherine texted led Miguel to a part of town he rarely visited, an industrial district where warehouses and light manufacturing spaces sprawled like sleeping giants beneath the afternoon sun. The building she'd indicated sat on a corner lot, surrounded by enough parking for a small army of classic cars. It was larger than Miguel had imagined possible, with bay doors big enough to accommodate everything from compact coupes to full-size sedans. Catherine's Mercedes was already in the parking lot when Miguel arrived, and she stood beside it wearing a smile that seemed to contain secrets. She'd traded her executive armor for more casual business attire, slacks and a blazer that suggested serious intent without the intimidation factor of full banking regalia. Miguel, thank you for coming. I hope you don't mind the change of venue. Not at all. Though I have to admit that I'm curious about why we're here. Catherine's smile widened, carrying what looked suspiciously like mischief. All will be revealed. But first, I want you to see something. She led him toward the building, producing a set of keys that caught the afternoon light like silver promises. The front entrance opened into a reception area that managed to be both spacious and intimate, with windows that flooded the space with natural light. Beyond that lay the main workshop, a cathedral of automotive possibility, with hydraulic lifts, tool benches, and enough space to house a dozen restoration projects simultaneously.
Miguel walked through the space in stunned silence, his mind automatically cataloging the possibilities. The lighting was perfect for detail work. The ventilation system could handle spray booth operations. The electrical service could power industrial equipment. This wasn't just a workshop. It was everything he dreamed of for Santos Custom Restoration, scaled larger than his most optimistic projections. "What do you think?" Catherine asked, watching his face carefully. "It's perfect," Miguel said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's everything I imagined and more. But I don't understand why you're showing it to me." Catherine leaned against one of the workbenches, her expression growing serious. "The loan committee met this morning, as scheduled. 3 hours of discussion, debate, and the kind of risk analysis that makes banking profitable but rarely inspiring." Miguel's stomach clenched, preparing for disappointment disguised as real estate tourism. "Your application was unconventional, to say the least. Limited collateral, modest credit history, no previous business ownership experience. From a traditional perspective, you represented exactly the kind of risk that committees are designed to minimize." Miguel nodded, understanding that he was hearing the preamble to rejection, the careful build-up to news that would send him back to his small shop and smaller dreams. "But I've learned something during my 30 years in banking," Catherine said, her voice carrying the weight of accumulated wisdom. "Numbers tell part of a story, but they don't tell the whole story. Character matters. Integrity matters. The willingness to do right by people when you have nothing to gain from it, that matters more than most committees understand." She paused, letting the words settle between them like dust motes dancing in afternoon sunlight. "I told them about a rainy afternoon 2 weeks ago when a stranger could have taken advantage of someone in distress but chose honesty instead. I told them about a man who talks about his work with the passion of an artist and the dedication of a craftsman. I told them about someone who understands that building a business means building relationships, one customer at a time." Miguel felt tears threatening and fought them back, unwilling to show weakness at what might still be the moment of his defeat. "The vote was close," Catherine admitted. "Closer than I would have liked. But when the counting was finished, when all the arguments had been made and all the risks had been weighed," she reached into her briefcase and withdrew a folder that seemed to glow with possibility. "Pinnacle National Bank is prepared to approve your loan application for Santos Custom Restoration. $50,000 at prime rate plus 2% with a 5-year repayment schedule." Miguel stared at the folder as if it might disappear if he looked away, as if this moment might dissolve into the kind of dream that felt real until consciousness intruded with cruel clarity. The words seemed to echo in the empty workshop, bouncing off walls that might soon house his life's work. I don't know what to say."
"You could start with yes," Catherine suggested, her professional composure cracking to reveal genuine warmth. "Though I should mention that approval comes with certain conditions." Miguel's brief moment of elation dimmed slightly. Of course there were conditions. There were always conditions, catches that transformed gifts into obligations, strings that turned opportunities into entanglements. What kind of conditions? Catherine gestured around the workshop space, her smile returning with renewed intensity. "The bank requires that you lease this facility as your primary location for Santos Custom Restoration. The lease terms are included in your loan package, favorable rates with options for expansion as your business grows." Miguel looked around the space again, trying to process the magnitude of what was being offered.
This wasn't just approval, it was a complete transformation of his modest dreams into something larger and more magnificent than he dared to imagine. But how? This space must cost. The building is owned by Pinnacle National Bank. We acquired it 6 months ago when the previous owner defaulted on their commercial loan. It's been sitting empty, costing us money every month it remains unoccupied. Leasing it to you solves multiple problems simultaneously. Miguel felt the universe realigning around him, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place with satisfying precision. So you're not just approving my loan, you're providing the perfect location for my business. I'm creating conditions for success rather than merely hoping for it, corrected. Banking isn't just about lending money, Miguel. It's about building communities, supporting dreams that strengthen the economic fabric of the region. Your success becomes our success. Miguel walked to one of the large windows that overlooked the parking area, imagining it filled with classic cars in various stages of resurrection. Mustangs and Corvettes, Thunderbirds and Camaros, each one carrying someone's memories and dreams, each one waiting for skilled hands to restore its glory. This was more than a business opportunity. It was a chance to become the kind of man his father had dreamed of being, to build something that mattered beyond mere profit and loss. "There's one more thing," Catherine said, and Miguel turned to face her, wondering what other surprises this afternoon might hold. The bank would like to commission Santos Custom Restoration for its first official project. Miguel's eyebrows rose in surprise. What kind of project? Catherine's smile turned almost mischievous. "I have a 1965 Ford Mustang convertible that's been sitting in my garage for 15 years. It belonged to my late husband, his pride and joy before cancer took him too soon. I've been looking for the right person to restore it. Someone who understands that some cars carry more than just engines and memories." Miguel felt the weight of honor settling on his shoulders like a mantle. To be entrusted with something so personal, so laden with emotion and history, it was exactly the kind of work he dreamed of doing. The intersection of craftsmanship and compassion that elevated mechanical repair into something approaching art. "I would be honored to restore your husband's Mustang," Miguel said, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise you, it will receive the same care and attention I would give to my father's memory." Catherine nodded, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. "I know it will. That's why I fought so hard for your loan approval, Miguel, because I believe that some things, integrity, craftsmanship, the willingness to treat other people's treasures as if they were your own, are worth more than any risk assessment may ever measure." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, two people from different worlds united by the understanding that dreams, properly tended, could transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. Miguel thought about Sofia, about the pride she would feel when she saw her father's vision made manifest. He thought about his father Carlos and hoped that somewhere in whatever realm spirits inhabit, the old man was smiling at the sight of his son finally stepping into the future he always deserved. "When can I start?" Miguel asked, surprising himself with the strength in his voice. "The lease agreement can be signed tomorrow morning," Catherine replied. "Equipment financing is part of your loan package, so you can begin outfitting the shop immediately. I'd estimate you could be operational within a month.
Maybe less, if you're as determined as I think you are." Miguel walked back through the workshop space, his footsteps echoing in the emptiness that would soon be filled with the sounds of restoration, the whisper of sandpaper on metal, the hum of compressors, the satisfied rumble of engines brought back to life. Each step felt like a stride into a future he'd barely dared to imagine. "Catherine," he said, turning to face the woman who'd transformed his life with equal measures of faith and business acumen. "Why did you really fight for this loan? I mean, beyond the business case you made to the committee." Catherine considered the question for a long moment, her gaze drifting to the windows where afternoon light painted the empty workshop in shades of gold and possibility. "Because 30 years ago I was a young banker trying to prove myself in a world that didn't always welcome women in positions of authority. I made my share of mistakes, approved loans that shouldn't have been approved, denied applications that deserved better consideration. But along the way, I learned that the best investments aren't always the safest ones. Sometimes you have to bet on character over collateral, on dreams over data." She paused, her expression growing more personal. "My husband used to say that the measure of a life wasn't how much money you accumulated, but how many other people's dreams you helped make real. This loan, this opportunity, it's my way of honoring his memory while investing in yours." Miguel felt the full weight of gratitude and responsibility settling into his chest. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about honoring the faith Catherine had shown, the risk she had taken, the belief she had expressed in his ability to transform opportunity into success. "I won't let you down," he said, meaning it with every fiber of his being. "I know you won't," Catherine replied, "because men like you don't know how to quit, and dreams like yours don't accept anything less than complete commitment." As they walked back toward their cars, Miguel felt as if he were floating slightly above the ground, tethered to earth only by the weight of possibility in his hands. The loan documents felt substantial and real, proof that this wasn't some elaborate dream, but actual, tangible opportunity made manifest through the intersection of need and faith. Sophia would be getting home from school soon, and Miguel could hardly wait to see her face when he told her that her papa's dreams were finally, miraculously becoming reality. The little girl who'd encouraged him to try rather than settle, who'd believed in him when he struggled to believe in himself, would get to watch her father transform from a dreamer into someone who made dreams come true. But first, Miguel had one stop to make. He drove to the cemetery where his father rested beneath a simple headstone that bore the inscription, "Carlos Santos. He fixed more than cars." He knelt beside the grave, placing his hand on the earth that covered the man who taught him everything about integrity and nothing about giving up. "We did it, Papa," he whispered to the afternoon breeze. "Santos Custom Restoration is going to happen. Your grandson's going to grow up knowing that dreams aren't just fantasies, they're blueprints for building better lives." The wind rustled through the trees overhead, and Miguel chose to interpret it as approval from a man who understood that the best inheritance wasn't money or property, but the knowledge that honest work and unwavering character could overcome almost any obstacle. Tomorrow would bring contracts and equipment orders, business licenses and insurance policies, all the mundane details that transform vision into reality. But today, Miguel Santos allowed himself simply to savor the miracle of possibility made manifest, the understanding that sometimes, just sometimes, the universe conspired to help those who dared to dream beyond their circumstances. 6 months later, Miguel Santos stood in the doorway of Santos Custom Restoration, watching the morning sun paint his workshop in shades of gold and possibility. The space that had once echoed with emptiness now hummed with the purposeful activity of dreams made manifest. 3 classic cars occupied the hydraulic lifts. A 1967 Chevelle SS that would soon purr like a mechanical panther. A 1970 Plymouth Cuda whose engine bay gleamed with fresh chrome. And in the place of honor near the front windows, Catherine's 1965 Mustang convertible, its restoration nearly complete after months of meticulous work. The transformation had been nothing short of miraculous. What had begun as an empty industrial space had evolved into a cathedral of automotive artistry, where every tool had its place and every project received the reverent attention of a master craftsman working on a priceless painting. The walls displayed photographs of completed restorations, each image telling the story of rust transformed into beauty, abandonment redeemed through patience and skill. Miguel had hired 2 employees, Tony Vasquez, a young mechanic with gifted hands and an eagerness to learn that reminded Miguel of himself at that age, and Sarah Chen, a recent automotive technology graduate whose understanding of modern diagnostic equipment complemented Miguel's intuitive grasp of mechanical systems. Together, they formed a team united by the shared belief that their work was about more than mere transportation. They were preserving history, one classic car at a time. The business had exceeded even Miguel's most optimistic projections. Word of mouth in the classic car community traveled with the speed of gossip in small towns, and satisfied customers became evangelical advocates for Santos Custom Restoration. The waiting list for full restorations stretched 4 months into the future, and Miguel had learned the pleasant burden of having to turn away work because quality could not be compromised for quantity. But success, Miguel had discovered, carried its own weight. Each morning brought decisions that affected not just his own future, but the livelihoods of his employees, the satisfaction of his customers, the financial obligations he'd undertaken. The responsibility was heavier than any engine he'd ever lifted, but it was a burden he carried with pride because it meant he was building something larger than himself. Sophia pushed through the front door carrying a paper bag that smelled of fresh donuts and her mother's coffee, a weekly tradition they'd established when the shop opened. At 13 now, she'd grown taller and more confident, carrying herself with the quiet assurance of a young woman who'd watched her father transform impossible dreams into daily reality. "Morning, Papa," she said, kissing his cheek before distributing breakfast to Tony and Sarah. "Mrs. Patterson called. She wants to know if you can look at her Honda again." Miguel smiled at the mention of their old customer, whose ancient car had become something of a neighborhood legend. Mrs. Patterson's Honda had been on life support for so long that Miguel suspected it was running on sheer stubbornness and prayers. But he continued to service it because some relationships transcended mere business, because loyalty deserved to be rewarded with loyalty. "Tell her to bring it in Tuesday afternoon, and remind her that one of these days that car is going to give up the ghost and she needs to start thinking about replacement." "She says the Honda will outlive us all," Sophia laughed. "I think she might be right."
As Sophia settled at the small desk in the office area to work on homework before school, Miguel felt the familiar surge of gratitude that had become as much a part of his morning routine as coffee and checking the day's schedule. His daughter was thriving in ways that went beyond academics. She developed confidence that came from watching her father succeed, security that flowed from financial stability, and pride that radiated from being part of something special. The bell above the front door chimed, and Catherine Pinnacle entered carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the satisfied expression of someone about to witness the culmination of a carefully orchestrated plan. She'd become a regular visitor to the shop, ostensibly to check on the progress of her Mustang, but really, Miguel suspected, because she enjoyed watching her investment in human potential did pay dividends measured in more than mere dollars.
"Good morning, Miguel," she said, offering him one of the coffee cups. "I brought the good stuff, none of that motor oil you usually drink." Miguel accepted the coffee gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma of beans that probably cost more than most people spent on lunch. "You spoil me, Catherine. I'm going to get used to the finer things in life." "That's the plan," she said with a smile. "Success should come with some perks." They walked together toward the Mustang, its candy apple red paint gleaming under the workshop lights like liquid fire. Miguel had spent countless hours on this restoration, treating every component with the reverence due a memorial to love lost. The interior had been reupholstered in period-correct black leather, the chrome bumpers polished to mirror brightness, the engine rebuilt to deliver both authentic power and modern reliability. "She's beautiful," Catherine said, running her fingers along the car's flawless fender. "Robert would have loved seeing her like this." Miguel heard the catch in her voice, the way memories of her late husband could still ambush her with unexpected emotion. "Tell me about him, about what this car meant to both of you." Catherine settled onto a nearby stool, her gaze growing distant as she traveled back through decades to happier times. "Robert bought this Mustang in 1967, 2 years after we were married. He was a young attorney then, working impossible hours to establish his practice, and this car was his one indulgence. Every Saturday morning, he'd wash and wax it in our driveway, taking longer than any car deserved, but claiming it was therapeutic." She paused, lost in the mechanics of memory. "We drove it on our honeymoon, took weekend trips to the coast, used it for date nights when Sophia was little. When our daughter, Sarah, was little. Sometimes I think of your Sophia as the daughter I never had." Miguel felt touched by the comparison, understanding that Catherine's interest in his family went beyond mere business relationship. She'd become something like a surrogate grandmother to Sophia, offering guidance and opportunities that enriched her daughter's world in ways Miguel could never have provided alone. "When Robert got sick," Catherine continued, "he made me promise not to sell the car. He said it held too many good memories to let it go to strangers. But after he died, I couldn't bear to look at it. Every time I saw it in the garage, I remembered all the places we'd never go together, all the drives we'd never take." Miguel nodded, understanding how objects could become monuments to loss as well as love. "But watching you work on it these past months," Catherine said, "seeing it come back to life under your hands, it's like getting Robert back in some small way. Not the man, of course, but the joy he found in this car, the happiness it represented." Miguel felt the weight of responsibility and honor settling on his shoulders. "When you drive it for the first time, it's going to feel like he's sitting right beside you." Catherine's eyes brightened with unshed tears. "That's exactly what I'm hoping for." Tony called from across the shop, his voice carrying excitement that made Miguel turn toward the young mechanic. "Mr. Santos, you need to see this!" Miguel and Catherine walked to where Tony was working on the Chevelle, his laptop connected to diagnostic equipment that would have seemed like science fiction to mechanics of his father's generation. The screen displayed engine performance data that painted a picture of mechanical perfection. Compression ratios, fuel mixture, timing advance, all the numbers that separated adequate restoration from automotive artistry. "Look at these readings," Tony said, pointing to the display with barely contained enthusiasm. "This engine is performing better than factory specifications. The customer is going to be amazed." Miguel felt the familiar surge of pride that came from watching his team excel, from knowing that the knowledge he'd accumulated over decades was being passed down to the next generation of craftsmen. Tony had arrived 6 months ago as a competent mechanic. Under Miguel's tutelage, he was becoming an artist. "Good work, Tony. The customer's picking it up Friday, so let's focus on final detailing. Every surface should look better than the day it rolled off the assembly line." As Tony returned to his work with renewed energy, Miguel marveled at how his success had created opportunities for others. Tony was earning enough to support his young family while learning skills that would serve him for a lifetime. Sarah was gaining experience that would make her invaluable in an industry that desperately needed talented technicians. Even the local parts suppliers and specialty shops had benefited from Santos Custom Restoration's steady business. The morning progressed with the comfortable rhythm of successful enterprise. Customers called to check on projects, suppliers delivered specialized components, and Miguel found himself moving seamlessly between the roles of craftsman, teacher, and businessman. Each responsibility fed the others, creating a synergy that made the whole greater than the sum of its parts. Around noon, Miguel received a call that made his heart skip with unexpected opportunity. Jerry Morrison, who owned the most prestigious classic car dealership in the Pacific Northwest, wanted to discuss a partnership that could expand Santos Custom Restoration's reach beyond individual customers into the realm of museum-quality concours restorations. "Miguel, I've been hearing remarkable things about your work," Morrison said, his voice carrying the authority of someone whose opinion shaped markets. "I have customers who are willing to invest serious money in world-class restorations. Are you interested in taking on projects that could establish Santos Custom Restoration as the premier shop on the West Coast?" Miguel felt the familiar combination of excitement and terror that accompanied major opportunities. Success, he'd learned, created its own momentum, opening doors to possibilities he'd never imagined when his dreams were constrained by the limitations of his small neighborhood shop. "What kind of projects are we talking about?" Miguel asked, already knowing that whatever Morrison proposed would push the boundaries of his current capabilities. "Million-dollar restorations, one-of-a-kind classics that require the kind of attention to detail that borders on obsession. Cars that will be judged by concours standards where perfection isn't good enough. They have to be better than they were when they left the factory." Miguel looked around his workshop, calculating whether his current equipment could handle such demanding work. The equipment was excellent, his team was talented, but projects of that magnitude would require expanded facilities, additional specialized tools, perhaps even more employees.
"I'm interested," Miguel said finally, "but I'd need to see the specific requirements, understand the timelines and expectations. Of course, I'll email you details on 3 potential projects. Take your time reviewing them, but don't take too long. Opportunities like this don't wait around forever." After Morrison hung up, Miguel sat quietly for several minutes, processing the magnitude of what had just been offered. 6 months ago, he'd been struggling to keep his father's small shop afloat. Now he was being courted by the kind of dealership that catered to collectors whose automotive budgets exceeded most people's annual incomes. Catherine appeared at his elbow, having observed the phone conversation with the knowing smile of someone who understood the trajectory of ambition. "Good news?" "Potentially amazing news," Miguel said, explaining Morrison's offer while his mind raced through the implications. "But also terrifying news. This kind of work could establish Santos Custom Restoration as one of the premier shops in the country, or it could overwhelm us and destroy everything we've built if we're not ready." Catherine nodded thoughtfully. "Growth always involves risk. The question isn't whether to take chances, but which chances are worth taking." Miguel thought about his father, about the dreams Carlos had but never had the opportunity to pursue, about Sofia, who deserved to see her father reach for greatness rather than settle for adequacy, about the employees who depended on his decisions, the customers who trusted his judgment, the legacy he was building with every choice he made.
"What do you think?" Miguel asked, valuing Catherine's perspective above almost anyone else's. "I think you've already proven you can turn opportunity into success," she said. 6 months ago, you convinced a bank to bet $50,000 on a dream. Now you're being asked to bet on an even bigger dream. The only real question is whether you still believe in yourself as much as the rest of us believe in you." That afternoon, Miguel spent time walking through his shop, seeing it with fresh eyes. The space that had seemed impossibly large 6 months ago now felt appropriately sized for current operations, but potentially constraining for future growth. The equipment that had represented the height of automotive technology might need upgrading to meet concourse standards. The team that handled current projects beautifully might require expansion to tackle million-dollar restorations. But beneath all the practical considerations lay a deeper question. Was Miguel Santos ready to become the kind of businessman who could operate at the highest levels of his industry? Was he prepared to transform from a neighborhood mechanic who'd gotten lucky into a true entrepreneur who shaped markets rather than simply serving them? Sophia found him still pondering these questions when she returned from school, her backpack slung over one shoulder and her expression bright with the enthusiasm of youth encountering infinite possibility. "Papa, you look like you're trying to solve the mysteries of the universe," she said, settling beside him on the bench where he'd been contemplating his future. "Close," Miguel admitted. "I'm trying to decide how big to dream." Sophia considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important questions. "Remember what you used to tell me when I was afraid to try something new? That the only real failure was not trying at all?" Miguel smiled at hearing his own wisdom reflected back to him by the person whose opinion mattered most. "I remember." "Then maybe the question isn't how big to dream, but whether you're brave enough to chase the biggest dreams." As evening settled over the city, Miguel made his decision.
He called Jerry Morrison and accepted the opportunity to bid on the prestigious restoration projects, understanding that success would require expanding his operation, investing in new equipment, and stepping fully into the role of industry leader he was being invited to assume. But first, he had one more task to complete. The Mustang's restoration was finished, ready for the moment when Catherine would turn the key and reconnect with memories that had been lovingly preserved in chrome and steel. Miguel had saved this moment for last, understanding that some milestones deserved to be savored rather than rushed. Catherine arrived as the sun was setting, painting the workshop in shades of amber and gold that made the Mustang's red paint glow like captured fire. Miguel had positioned the car near the front windows, surrounded by the tools and equipment that had brought it back to life, ready for its moment of resurrection. "She's ready," Miguel said simply. Catherine approached the car with the reverence due a religious artifact, her fingers trembling slightly as she opened the driver's door and settled behind the wheel that her husband had gripped during countless drives through their shared history. Miguel handed her the keys, each one polished to perfection and attached to a keychain that bore the Santos Custom Restoration logo. The engine turned over immediately, settling into the deep rumble of American V8 power, harnessed and refined. Catherine's eyes filled with tears as the sound transported her across decades to Saturday morning drives and sunset cruises along coastal highways where love had been measured in miles shared rather than words spoken. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the engine's satisfied purr. "Thank you for giving him back to me." Miguel stepped back, understanding that this moment belonged to Catherine and Robert and the memories they'd made together. But he also understood that he'd played a crucial role in something larger than automotive restoration. He'd helped heal a heart that had been broken by loss, had used his skills to build a bridge between past and present that allowed love to survive the ultimate separation.
As Catherine drove away in her restored Mustang, Miguel knew this was just the beginning. Sophia peered at his side, slipping her hand into his as they watched the Mustang's taillights disappear into the evening traffic. "I'm proud of you, Papa," she said quietly. "Not just for the business, but for who you are, for never forgetting that success means helping other people's dreams come true too." Miguel squeezed his daughter's hand, understanding that the greatest measure of any man's life wasn't what he achieved for himself, but what he made possible for others. Santos Custom Restoration would continue to grow, would take on increasingly prestigious projects, would establish itself as one of the premier shops in the country. But none of that would matter as much as the simple knowledge that he'd honored his father's memory while creating opportunities for the next generation to build upon. The American dream, Miguel had learned, wasn't about accumulating wealth or achieving fame. It was about the belief that hard work and integrity could transform circumstances, that dreams properly tended could bloom into realities that blessed not just the dreamer, but everyone whose lives they touched. As father and daughter walked back into the shop that had become the foundation of their transformed life, Miguel felt the deep contentment that came from knowing he'd lived up to the faith others had placed in him while staying true to the values his father had instilled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to prove that success built on character could endure any test. But tonight, Miguel Santos was exactly where he belonged, surrounded by the tools of his trade, the fruits of his labor, and the love of the daughter who'd reminded him that courage was just another word for believing in yourself enough to try.
"Morning, Papa," Sophia said,
appearing at his elbow with the coffee and donuts that had remained their weekly tradition, despite the fact that she could now afford considerably more expensive breakfast options. The Patterson restoration is scheduled for final inspection this afternoon. Miguel smiled at the mention of Mrs. Patterson, whose ancient Honda had finally succumbed to mechanical mortality 3 years earlier. Rather than simply purchasing a replacement vehicle, she had asked Miguel to restore her late husband's 1969 Camaro, which had been gathering dust in her garage since his death 15 years earlier. It had become one of Miguel's favorite projects, not because of its monetary value, which was modest compared to the Ferraris and Lamborghinis that typically occupied his shop's premium slots, but because it represented the same intersection of mechanical skill and emotional healing that had characterized Catherine's Mustang restoration. "Is she nervous?" Miguel asked, understanding that for Mrs. Patterson, seeing her husband's car returned to its original glory would be both celebration and memorial service. "Excited, nervous, I think. She's been calling every day this week to make sure we haven't forgotten any details her husband would have insisted upon." Miguel nodded, appreciating customers who understood that restoration was about more than making old cars look new. The best projects were collaborations between craftsman and owner, where technical expertise served emotional needs that transcended mere transportation. The intercom crackled with Tony Vasquez's voice, now the shop foreman responsible for overseeing the mechanical aspects of every restoration. "Mr. Santos, the Shelby Cobra is ready for your final inspection whenever you have time." Miguel checked his watch, calculating how to balance the day's competing demands. The Cobra represented the kind of project that had established Santos Custom Restoration's reputation among serious collectors, a 1965 Ford 27 Cobra that had been discovered in a barn in Montana, its original owner having parked it in 1972 with the intention of restoring it someday. That someday had never arrived. But 43 years later, Miguel's team had undertaken the painstaking process of returning the car to better than original condition, while maintaining its authenticity and character. "I'll be down in 10 minutes, Miguel replied, feeling the familiar anticipation that accompanied the completion of any significant project. After 5 years and hundreds of restorations, he still experienced the same rush of satisfaction when an engine fired to life for the first time, or when sunlight revealed paintwork that seemed to glow from within. As Miguel descended to the main workshop floor, he passed the gallery wall where photographs documented the evolution of Santos Custom Restoration from dream to industry leader. The earliest images showed him working alone in the original space, surrounded by hand tools and determination. Later photos captured the gradual expansion, new equipment arriving, additional employees joining the team, increasingly exotic cars occupying the lifts. The most recent additions showed award ceremonies where Santos Restorations had won Best in Show at concourse events from Pebble Beach to Amelia Island, recognition that had elevated Miguel's reputation from regional craftsman to national authority. But the photograph that meant the most to Miguel occupied the center of the display, a simple image of him and Sophia standing beside Catherine's Mustang on the evening of its first drive. Both were smiling with the satisfaction of shared accomplishment. Father and daughter united by the understanding that they'd participated in something larger than automotive restoration. They'd helped heal a heart that had been broken by loss, had used their skills to preserve love in a form that could be touched and driven and remembered. Catherine had become more than a customer or even a friend. She'd evolved into something approaching family, serving as Sophia's unofficial mentor and Miguel's trusted advisor as the business grew beyond anything he'd originally imagined. She'd retired from Pinnacle National Bank 2 years earlier, but remained active on several corporate boards, using her influence to connect Santos Custom Restoration with collectors and investors who appreciated craftsmanship that bordered on art. The Cobra sat in the center of the main workshop like a jewel in an appropriately magnificent setting, its guardsman blue paint reflecting the overhead lights with mirror-like perfection. Miguel walked slowly around the car, his trained eyes searching for any imperfection that might have escaped earlier inspections. The chrome gleamed without flaw, the leather interior looked as if it had been installed that morning, and the engine bay displayed the kind of mechanical artistry that made automotive enthusiasts weak in the knees. Tony appeared at Miguel's shoulder, his expression carrying the nervous pride of a student awaiting his master's judgment. Everything checks out mechanically. Compression is perfect across all 8 cylinders, carburation is spot on, and the transmission shifts like silk. The customer is going to be amazed.
Miguel nodded his approval, understanding that Tony's assessment could be trusted completely. The young mechanic had grown into a master craftsman under Miguel's tutelage, developing the kind of intuitive understanding of automotive systems that couldn't be taught in schools, but emerged from years of working alongside someone who treated every car as if it were his own. "Schedule the delivery for next Thursday," Miguel said, "and make sure the owner understands that the first 1,000 miles are critical for proper break-in. This engine may look original, but everything inside is new and needs to be treated accordingly." As Tony returned to his work, Miguel felt the deep satisfaction that came from watching his employees succeed. The knowledge he'd accumulated over decades was being passed down to a new generation of craftsmen who would carry the Santos Custom Restoration philosophy into the future. The belief that every car deserved to be treated with respect, every customer's dreams were worth honoring, and quality was never an accident, but always the result of conscious choice. The afternoon brought a steady stream of customers, suppliers, and the kind of routine business that had become the foundation of Miguel's transformed life. He reviewed financial reports that showed continued growth, approved equipment purchases that would enhance the shop's capabilities, and consulted with restoration specialists about techniques for working with increasingly exotic materials and technologies. But the highlight of the day arrived at 4 o'clock, when Mrs. Patterson shuffled into the workshop wearing her best dress and carrying a box of tissues she'd clearly brought in anticipation of an emotional experience. At 83, she moved with the careful deliberation of someone whose body had accumulated 8 decades of wear, but her eyes sparkled with the anticipation of a bride approaching the altar. "Is she ready?" Mrs. Patterson asked, her voice quavering with excitement and nervousness. Miguel led her to where the Camaro waited, its hugger orange paint gleaming under specially adjusted lighting that revealed every curve and line in perfect detail. The restoration had required 14 months of painstaking work, tracking down original parts that hadn't been manufactured in 50 years, rebuilding systems that had deteriorated beyond normal repair, and recreating details that existed only in faded photographs and the memories of a woman who'd loved the car's original owner. Mrs. Patterson approached the Camaro with the reverence due a religious artifact, her weathered hands trembling as she traced the outline of the SS badges that her husband had polished every Saturday morning for 15 years. Miguel had made sure those badges were the originals, carefully restored rather than replaced, understanding that some details carried emotional weight that transcended mere appearance. "He would have loved this," she whispered, settling behind the wheel with the careful movements of someone entering sacred space.
Miguel smiled at the comment, understanding that men of Mr. Patterson's generation had often expressed affection through the care they lavished on mechanical objects rather than through words that didn't come easily. The Camaro had been his love letter to his wife, his promise that he would always be able to take her anywhere she wanted to go, his way of showing that he was the kind of man who could be trusted to maintain and protect the things that mattered. When Mrs. Patterson turned the key, the engine came to life with the deep rumble of American V8 power properly harnessed and refined. The sound filled the workshop with automotive music that spoke of open highways and Saturday night cruises, of young love and middle-aged contentment, of dreams that had been preserved in steel and chrome and brought back to life through the skill of craftsmen who understood that their work was about more than mere mechanics.
As Mrs. Patterson drove slowly out of the shop, learning to reacquaint herself with the Camaro's power and handling, Miguel felt Sophia's presence at his side. His daughter had witnessed dozens of such deliveries over the years, but she still seemed moved by the emotional weight of returning restored dreams to their owners. "Do you ever get tired of this?" Sophia asked quietly. "Of being responsible for other people's most precious memories?" Miguel considered the question seriously, understanding that his daughter was really asking about the weight of carrying others' hopes and the pressure of living up to expectations that went far beyond mere mechanical competence. "Never tired. Sometimes overwhelmed by the responsibility, sometimes worried that I won't be able to deliver what people need, but never tired. This work gives meaning to everything else, the business decisions, the financial planning, the employee management. It's all in service of moments like this." Sophia nodded thoughtfully, and Miguel could see her processing the lesson for future application. She'd been accepted to MIT's mechanical engineering program with a full scholarship, planning to study automotive design with the intention of eventually returning to Santos Custom Restoration with knowledge that would expand their capabilities into areas Miguel had never imagined possible. The evening brought the weekly staff meeting, where Miguel reviewed the week's accomplishments, addressed any concerns or suggestions from his team. These gatherings had evolved from simple scheduling sessions into strategic planning meetings where some of the most talented automotive craftsmen on the West Coast contributed ideas that shaped the future direction of Santos Custom Restoration. Sarah Chen, now the shop's head of diagnostic services, presented her analysis of emerging technologies that could enhance their restoration capabilities. There's a new scanning system that can create three-dimensional maps of body panels with accuracy measured in fractions of millimeters. It could help us replicate damaged components that no longer exist in any parts catalog. Miguel nodded, understanding that staying at the forefront of restoration technology required constant investment in equipment and training that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. Success had provided the financial resources to pursue such innovations, but it also created the expectation that Santos Custom Restoration would continue setting industry standards rather than merely following them. The quiet was interrupted by the sound of a familiar engine pulling into the parking lot. Catherine's Mustang, still running perfectly after 5 years and 50,000 miles of regular driving. Catherine had initially treated the restored car like a museum piece, afraid to disturb its perfection with the contamination of daily use. But Miguel had convinced her that cars were meant to be driven, that the best tribute to her husband's memory was to experience the joy he'd found in the combination of power and precision that defined American muscle cars. Catherine entered the workshop carrying a bottle of wine and wearing the satisfied expression of someone who just completed a perfect evening drive. At 72, she moved with the confident energy of someone who'd found purpose in supporting others' dreams while pursuing her own delayed adventures. "I thought you might still be here," she said, offering Miguel the wine. "I've been driving the coast highway, watching the sunset reflect off the hood. Robert would have approved." Miguel accepted the wine gratefully, understanding that Catherine's evening drives had become a form of mobile meditation, a way of connecting with memories while creating new experiences that honored rather than replicated the past. "Any problems with the car?" Miguel asked, though he knew the answer. The Mustang had been restored to standards that exceeded original factory specifications, with modern reliability improvements that were invisible but ensured consistent performance. "She runs like a dream, though I have to admit I'm starting to think about commissioning another restoration. I've been looking at a 1970 Dodge Challenger that belonged to my brother. It's been sitting in storage for 20 years, waiting for someone to give it new life." Miguel smiled at the prospect, understanding that Catherine had become as addicted to the restoration process as any serious collector. She discovered that bringing classic cars back to life provided the same satisfaction that banking had once offered, the ability to transform potential into reality through careful planning and substantial investment. "We'd be honored to work on your brother's Challenger, though I should warn you that our waiting list has grown considerably. I'm patient. Good things are worth waiting for, as you've proven repeatedly." As they shared wine and talked about future projects, Miguel felt the deep contentment that came from understanding he'd successfully navigated the transition from dreamer to achiever without losing sight of the values that had made his success possible. Santos Custom Restoration had become more than a business. It was a community of craftsmen united by shared passion, a place where automotive history was preserved through the dedication of people who understood that their work would outlive them. Sophia appeared from the office area where she'd been working on college preparation materials, her arms full of scholarship applications and course catalogs that represented her bridge into a future where she would carry the Santos family legacy into realms Miguel could barely imagine. "Ready to go home, Papa?" she asked, though she suspected she could have stayed for hours discussing restoration techniques and business strategies with Catherine. As they prepared to leave, Miguel took one last look around the workshop that had become the foundation of his transformed life. The tools hung in perfect order, ready for tomorrow's challenges. The lifts held cars in various stages of resurrection, each one representing someone's dreams being carefully crafted into reality. The photographs on the walls documented not just completed projects, but the evolution of a man who dared to believe that honest work and unwavering commitment could overcome any obstacle. The drive home took them through neighborhoods where Miguel had spent his childhood, past the corner where his father's original shop had once stood, before being demolished to make way for a chain store that sold mass-produced mediocrity. Miguel felt no bitterness about the demolition. Buildings were temporary, but the lessons Carlos Santos had taught about integrity and craftsmanship had proven eternal. Their apartment had been replaced years earlier by a modest house in a quiet neighborhood where Sophia could walk to school and Miguel could work in a garage that served as his personal workshop for projects that were too small or too sentimental for Santos Custom Restoration's commercial operation. The garage currently housed a 1955 Chevrolet pickup that belonged to his father, its restoration proceeding slowly as Miguel worked on it during evenings and weekends, treating it as meditation rather than business.
As Sophia headed upstairs to continue working on college applications, Miguel settled in his favorite chair with the day's mail and the satisfaction of another successful day building dreams into reality. Among the usual business correspondence was a letter that made his heart skip with unexpected emotion. A handwritten note from Jerry Morrison, the high-end dealer who'd first recognized Santos Custom Restoration's potential for handling million-dollar projects.
Miguel, the letter began, I wanted you to know that the Duesenberg restoration your team completed last year won Best in Show at the Pebble Beach Concours d'Elegance. More importantly, it's given its owner so much joy that he's commissioned 2 additional restorations through our dealership. Your work continues to set the standard for what's possible when craftsmanship is combined with genuine caring. Miguel set the letter aside, feeling the quiet pride that came from recognition earned through years of consistent excellence. Awards were gratifying, but the real measure of success was the knowledge that his work had brought joy to people's lives, had preserved automotive history for future generations, and had created opportunities for talented craftsmen to practice their art at the highest levels. Sophia appeared in the doorway, wearing pajamas and carrying the cup of tea that had become her evening ritual during the stressful months of college preparation. "Good news in the mail?" she asked, settling into the chair beside his. Miguel showed her Morrison's letter, watching her face light up with the pride of a daughter who'd watched her father transform from struggling mechanic to industry leader without losing sight of the values that had made the journey possible. "I'm proud of you, Papa," she said quietly, "not just for business success, but for staying true to who you are. Remember that the point of having skills is to help other people." Miguel felt his throat tighten with emotion, understanding that his daughter had learned the most important lesson he could teach, that success without service was empty, that achievement without integrity was meaningless, and that the best inheritance he could leave her wasn't money or property, but the knowledge that honest work, performed with love, could change the world one small act at a time. As they sat together in comfortable silence, Miguel thought about the journey that had brought him from his father's cramped shop to the recognition he now enjoyed throughout the automotive world. Every step had been guided by principles Carlos Santos had instilled through example rather than lecture. Treat every customer with respect. Take pride in quality rather than quantity. And never forget that machines were just tools for serving human needs. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove that success built on character could endure any test. There would be difficult restorations that pushed the boundaries of what was possible, demanding customers who expected perfection measured in impossibly small tolerances, and business decisions that balanced growth with the values that had made growth possible. But tonight, Miguel Santos was exactly where he belonged, surrounded by the love of the daughter who'd inspired him to dream beyond his circumstances, sustained by the friendship of people who'd believed in his vision when belief required more faith than evidence, and blessed with the knowledge that he'd honored his father's memory while creating something that would endure long after he was gone. The American dream, Miguel had learned, wasn't about accumulating wealth or achieving fame. It was about the belief that character and commitment could transform circumstances, that dreams properly tended could bloom into realities that blessed not just the dreamer, but everyone whose lives they touched. It was about the understanding that success was measured not by what you achieved for yourself, but by what you made possible for others. As father and daughter climbed the stairs toward sleep and whatever dreams awaited them,
Miguel carried with him the deep satisfaction of a life lived with purpose, of work that mattered beyond mere commerce, and of love that had transformed a struggling mechanic's modest aspirations into a legacy that would inspire future generations to reach for their own impossible dreams. In the garage below, his father's pickup truck waited patiently for the next session of restoration work, its patient presence a reminder that some projects were too important to rush, that the best gifts were those crafted with love rather than urgency, and that the most meaningful inheritance was the knowledge that honest work, performed with integrity, could overcome any obstacle life might present. The circle was complete, but the story continued, carried forward by a young woman who would soon bring new knowledge and fresh vision to the work of preserving automotive history. Thank you for joining Miguel's incredible journey from struggling mechanic to successful entrepreneur. If this story inspired you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe for more amazing true stories of people who never gave up on their dreams. And Grow would tackle increasingly challenging projects and set new standards for excellence, but it would never lose sight of the simple truth that had made everything possible. That dreams, like classic cars, required patient craftsmanship to transform potential into lasting beauty.